to you via email, you and everybody else who registered, in about 24 hours, so you can refer back to it and show it to other people if you would like. Also, if you have any questions that come to mind during the webinar, please type them into the questions panel of your GoToWebinar interface, and we'll have a Q&A session at the end of DJ's presentation, and we'll answer as many of those questions as we have time for. If there end up being some questions that we don't get to today in our discussion, we'll answer those by contacting you directly after the webinar is over. So with that, we're going to get started. Please let me introduce DJ Boker. She is a family and consumer science teacher at Capitol Hill High School in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. She's been teaching for 17 years, and for the past 10 years, she has averaged between 5 and 6 grants or program sponsor applications per year. So she's a great resource for this topic. And DJ, it's all yours.
Why, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. This is a new experience for me talking to a screen, but feel free to jump in and type any questions you may have. And what I'm going to go through today is simply the process. I know a lot of us think that grants are these huge, major, monster RFPs that have to be done, and a lot of times that support that we want comes from the places you wouldn't think to look. So we're going to kind of get started on how I do the process and how I fund my program, because I have really great resources, tools, mentors, sponsors that all come in and work with me. What I'm going to go over today with you all is to know your program strengths. A lot of us don't even really know what to do and what's really good about what we do, because a lot of times as teachers we just don't toot our own horn or pat ourselves in the back. We just don't want to do that. We're going to talk about collecting data and statistics. A lot of grants, especially the large grants like the $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 grants, those things all require documentation. So we're going to talk about how to collect data and statistics on your program and how to compare yourself to other programs that might be competing against you for these grants. Then we're going to talk about kind of where to find those grants and find those sponsors. Then we're going to talk about when you get these things, once you get the money, what do you do with the money after you got it? How do you spend it? How do you not get in some kind of traps where you spend it? And then about documentation and reflect. Those have become two very, very, very important things as we go through this. And of course, I'll answer your questions at any point that we have those questions. Feel free to type them in and let them know, and we'll try to make sure that everyone's clear by the time this is done on, to the best of my ability, what I know and how I can share that information. The first thing, program strengths. I am real big on data documentation and pictures, and just to give you some ideas about program strengths, we all know in family consumer sciences, at least, and other things, there's competitions. Every time my kids compete, it's pictures, it's involvement. We talk about what we're doing. The program strengths are we out there in our community? The top picture up here, this is my kids at the Capitol here in Oklahoma City. They ask us, one of our sponsors asked us to help pass out books for Literacy Day. Do you think because they give me what I need that when they say, can you, my kids say, yes, we can, we dress up and off we go. Program strengths are what do you do well and how do we do it? When they ask for a display about what we do well, that's what this is over here. I put together one about our projects that we do. The kids went to the Capitol, they were versed in what we did. They talked about what we do. When we have an event where they need someone, they think of us first to come out there and do those things. And you all know how it is to jump in and do some of these projects. And then when one of our big mentor sponsors calls and says, hey, can you help us out? This is my students at the Thunder Arena. All those big old shirts that go out for all of the playoff games, my students are the ones out there putting those shirts on those chairs. And yes, is it a big job? But it's also, it gets us out in our community and talks about our strengths. This is that visual part of what we do. A lot of us just don't take time. I've got a recorder that records our program on a daily basis, what we do in classroom, the special things we do, and I store those pictures away, especially with digital media. We have a lot of opportunities today to store things in case we might need them. Great resources. And then, of course, we write them. This is an example of one I pulled from a successful grant not too long ago. Again, it was an Oklahoma State grant to give you an idea of how the verbiage might be and what might be written. I simply talk about where we are and what our transitions are. Here in Oklahoma, we're going to career clustering. that stranding or realigning of the program definitely changed my need for supplies and resources. And so with those new strands, this one particularly, we're changing the kitchen area to a commercial kitchen. We're talking $47,000 for an upgrade for that. That's a significant amount of money for a family consumer science program. And so I talked about the career clustering, what I needed, what the addition would do, and I always talk about where I get my funds already. That's where the Carl Perkins and program funds talk about. You know, a lot of them want to know, am I going to be the only support, or do I get it from somewhere else? And so I always mention that. And then, of course, I always mention principal and school support. A lot of them are really big on, are you a collaborative unit and collaborative in what you do? And so this is where a lot of those things were added. I always mention my principal and the support that he has. I talk about my administrative team a lot of times, and what my goals really are going to be, which is what that last sentence is. Now, this is simply a small paragraph that started off to talk about what my program is and what makes it really good and how we're part of what we do. After we have events, or we always use reflections. And you'll notice that a lot of times when you do the major grants, they ask for feedback. This is a kind of a casual picture I showed you, which you notice the paper down the front. Those students are getting ready to fill out surveys of the day-long event that we've been at, to talk about the reactions, what went on, what occurred. I survey my students in class at the end of the semester. They get an evaluation of my teaching, my program, and what I do. And those evaluation statistics are valuable when I go out to secure grants or partners or resources. And so a lot of times just collecting that and giving the kids a chance to tell you what their needs are. People love to hear from students. If you want to get money from someone, you show them the faces of those that are going to be receiving it and what they think and how their experiences have changed, and that's where the money really starts flowing into your program. And then make sure that when you write them, you have identified the outcomes you're going to be after. A lot of times they will ask for outcomes, or what's going to be the best part of what you do, or if I give you this money, what do you hope to gain? Most people that have, when I review, well, let's back up a little bit. A lot of my fellow peers have put in grants and not received them. And I'll say, well, let me take a look at your grant forms. And a lot of times what they fail to do is identify the outcome or what they hope to have for an outcome. And a lot of times they don't really talk about what's really good about what they do. I teach family consumer science, I teach life skills, I teach family studies. Okay, great. What happens when you do that? And so we need to make sure that our outcomes are going to be reasonable. Don't tell them that you're all of a sudden going to have 100% of your kids do something. Make it a reasonable and make it an identifiable. I call it my RAID method. That's why I put this down: reasonable, attainable, identifiable, and doable. I make sure that whatever I say on my grant can actually be accomplished and what I'm going to do. It's kind of like I wrote an entrepreneurial grant 2 years ago, and I asked for some large equipment to start doing some embroidery work. And I didn't tell them we're going to start a business the first year and make all these large things. I said, we're going to be training and looking and practicing and securing maybe some contracts to do some work. I talk about it being practical experience. I don't tell them we're going to start a school-based business, because you know what, that just may not happen the first year, especially with school district restrictions and things like this. So I need to make sure it's a reasonable outcome. You know, they don't expect me to do certain things, but sometimes we promise the moon and then can't deliver the moon. And so make sure that when you do a grant form, that you have an actual outcome. Don't say it'd be nice to have this. Say it'd be love to have this, and here's how I'm going to use it. And then make sure you can identify what it is. And I'm going to show you some resources on finding that verbiage to use to actually say what it is you're going to do, because a lot of times, and I don't mean this to sound bad, the grant forms are simply written in way too elemental verbiage. They just aren't written on a high enough level to be awarded by a lot of the larger companies. Now some things are a smaller type grant, and I'm going to kind of get into those smaller, what I call partner grants, and how they do. But this is one thing I want you to remember when you write these things, is that RAID is what you need to do. Make sure that what you're going to do is reasonable, attainable, identifiable, and very much doable. Here's an example. I wrote a grant here in Oklahoma. My FCCLA students have to have the official dress uniforms to be able to compete even on the district level, the very beginning level of competition. All of a sudden I went from having a few uniforms to needing, well, this year I needed 12 uniforms. And so I was scrambling toward the end of the year. You notice my timeline date on this. This came in relatively early last year. And all I told them was, for my outline, is that my project will be evaluated by the numbers that compete in FCCLA STAR competition. All right? I have 20 different competitions they could be in with 9th through 12th graders. And I hope to have 12 ready. Okay, 12 is a number that I normally have, but if I did not have these uniforms, those 12 would not be able to compete. So I told them the possibilities, I told them what I was planning on, and it was a very doable number. This is not a huge paragraph. Justifications do not always have to be these huge monster paragraphs. It's simply very, once again, reasonable, attainable, identifiable, and doable. I outlined what I was going to do in a very small paragraph, and I knew based on my previous statistics it was going to be very attainable, and I told them what I was going to do with it, and then I made sure that we did it the next year. Absolutely. And so this year, after I received this grant, and I went and bought FCCLA uniforms, I bought size 6 through 22, the entire thing, and a couple of men's outfits hanging in my closet. And when my students dressed up to wear them this year, I took a picture and included it with an additional thank you card to the foundation that this came from to tell them, here's the students in their uniform. Thank you for the money. Because this one was awarded through a foundation by a private person who happens to have a near and dear love of FCCLA, which used to be FHA years ago. And we somehow just were connected through one of those agencies. I'm going to show you those kind of agencies here in just a moment. When you get into technology grants, because I know this is things a lot of you are looking at for the Realityworks and how these things work. This is actually a piece of a technology grant that I wrote to get the Real Care babies. I just bought a new series. I've used these since they were baby think-it-overs in my classroom 15 years ago. And I now have a cart with 20 new of the Real Care 3s, the ones that are temperature sensitive and they have the sensors on them, really step up. And this is an example. Like I said, this will be available online later that shows you the justification that I wrote for the technology grant. Now you notice it's a little bit larger, and again, this is just one paragraph of what was a 5-page grant. But I want you to take a look at what I talk about in here. I mentioned my statistics, which I'm going to show you in a little bit how to get those statistics. I mentioned, of course, the career clustering, because we're heading to that. These are all what I would call buzzwords they need to know. I talk about they're going to be trained and eligible in these clusters. So I'm preparing them not just for parenting, but we can actually use these as a career facet. Again, I've spread that thing out. I've multifaceted my use of the technology that we're spending several $1,000s on obtaining. Then I've talked about statistics. We have the highest rate of abuse cases as teens. Okay, we talk about reality. I don't belabor this. I simply mention it. You notice these things are all simply concise sentences that bounce from topic to topic to topic. I don't have to tell them about how many abuse cases we had for this one. I don't have to tell them how much we did. I simply mention that, yes, this is unattainable. And you know what? If they call later on for clarification, I will have that data ready, and I'll show you how to do that as well. After completing a training for the Real Care and visiting with our advisory committee, this means I've had outside information that comes to my school through an advisory committee, again another buzzword, that's told them this is something that other people also think I might need. Okay? Came to attention why simulators are being used in other jurisdictions to prove parenting skills. it gives them a higher order use that I'm trying to meet with. The new model, I talk about I'm doing an upgrade, technology upgrade. I talk about what I have and what I would like to get. Okay. I'm used to asking if there's any questions. Sorry about that. All right, let's talk about how we collect the data. I've told you why I need it. Let's talk about how we get it. Everything we do these days is data-driven. It's online. It's in resources. There is data that is used for all kinds of everything from attendance to, I mean, our very existence is ran by data. With No Child Left Behind, we have a grading scale here in Oklahoma. So data pretty well drives everything that we stop and do. And so they have to have data to provide, to make them examples of what we do have. So there are agencies that will support these purchases because a lot of them have the very same requirement for data. There's also university programs. They have students that are studying these issues just like we do. And so a lot of times, I don't have time to collect all the data. I don't have time to work with all these programs, but there are all kinds of graduate students that need a place to work. There's all kinds of graduate students that need a project to work on. I mean, they're looking for projects as much as we're looking for people to do projects for us. And so contacting schools and universities in your area to help collect this data can be a really good way to work with it. And so I've made partnerships here in Oklahoma City with my local universities. OU has been a huge worker with us. UCO has been a huge worker. I've even used my community colleges for some of the smaller things. Some of the agencies I've dealt with are child advocacy. Department of Human Services, they will have outside agencies that also would like to change statistics. And so we both have a common goal. It's just time to share those resources. I've worked with private foundations that will assist with this kind of stuff. And of course, your school has data. And this is where my involvement with high schools at work a number of years ago, when I realized the true importance of data, I started collecting and keeping this data. I have a notebook. And at the end of semester, I bake cookies, I take them downstairs to our attendance office, and they are more than happy to print off me the reports that I need to keep my data going. And so I keep track of our absences here at school. I have those broken down by grade level. I have them broken down by gender. And then I myself disseminate those based on our pregnant and parenting teams and other at-risk populations. The registrar can give me not who, but the number of what our failure rate is in classes, because we teachers all turn that into her. Our graduation rate as opposed to our entrance rate. There are several grants out there that are simply to enhance and increase your matriculation rate from high school. And so you can't secure those grants unless you know what that graduation rate is and what you hope to increase it with. Graduation rate is a big part of No Child Left Behind. And when I realized that, I saw a new opportunity for a resource for obtaining grants. And of course, if you're looking at things like the Realityworks projects, pregnancy is a huge issue in high schools. Pregnant and parenting teams, a lot of people are throwing up their hands saying, how do we deal with this? What do we do with them? Some districts have alternative schools. We have an alternative school in our district, but my school alone could supply that full of students. And so I need to keep track of that data here in my own building. Dropout status, I keep track of students as far as what our attendance is overall. For this one, I do a 9-week basis because the dropout is a real issue for our school, and there are tons of grants that will help you assist with dropout prevention. Now, again, I realize a lot of the schools that may be listening have different needs, wants, desires. You may not have a dropout status that's a problem, but what I am trying to get across to you is your school probably will have a need of some sort that you can use to secure these grants and information. I always come back to the report that was done by NBC several years back. Pregnancy rate that was as high as my inner city urban school. And it was a small rural town in one of the East Coast states. And they were amazed this small town had such a huge pregnancy dropout rate. That was great for comparison. So a lot of times just knowing the statistics of what your school has and what's available gives you a real base to work from. Now, I know part of y'all right now are probably going like, I can't get this stuff all put together. How on earth do I do this? So, but I promise you, the first time you do it is the most difficult. My very first year to do this was over Christmas break. I sat down and made a big 3-inch binder, and I put my dividers in it that show the areas I need to be collecting. And as I collect this data each year, I simply add to those areas. But it reminds me what I need to collect and what I need to gather. And that data is always readily available to show what I've done and to pull from to write for these grants. An idea of supporting documentation. National Campaign for Pregnancy, they did a freeze frame several years in a row, and every so often it comes out. And this is a snapshot of America's teens. And what it gives you, they have surveyed teens nationwide. It gives you all kinds of great information about what they think, what they're doing, school engagement, high school completion, parental communication even. I mean, there is tons of data. Risky sexual behavior, contraceptive use, age of partners, are they related? You pull a book like this and you can also all of a sudden quote data, and you can compare this data to your school data. You can also find in there a lot of good current buzzwords and documentation use. A lot of times grants are simply turned down because no one seems to think that you're with it or that you have the current information going on. And so this is where I keep current with periodicals. Don't have time to read tons. I know what the school year's like. I am one. However, there are certain places when I'm hunting for a grant or when I see an opportunity and they talk about dropout status, then I can pull my freeze frame book up and take a look at documentation. Well, this last year they said this is what's going on with America's teen. Here's what I see in my school. Here's why we need this. Supporting documentation. A lot of times they just need justification to send back to their companies about what they've done with what they have. Then you can go online if you have access. There are lots of national agencies. I have used all of these. The National Campaign has a state-by-state sheet that will give you your state profile that they keep. Now, the data they have from here usually comes from actual reports that go into your state of the health. In Oklahoma, I'm not sure what states you're online from, but in Oklahoma, every March, we have a state of the health report that comes out. That state of the health tells us the most current statistics on all of the information for teens. Everything from health issues, drug use, just basic health issues. Are they healthy? Are they obese? Of course, pregnant parenting, abuse, death rates. What caused teen deaths for the year before? Great information, especially for comparison or just outlining and talking about things. And of course, we all know about the CDC, the Center for Disease Control. I have used their information for a number of years to document and substantiate why I might need grants or justification. But there's a lot more resources than just this, and in your local area you might contact who your agencies are that service your students. Your school district itself may have great information for what needs to be done and how it needs to be done. Here's some sample data I collected. Now, I took out the student names over here at the side, but we have a huge issue with our pregnant and parenting teams at our school. That population has become a real huge issue. And so I have used this population to gather grants and information, supporting partners, mentors that come into my class, all these types of resources. But a lot of them said, I need data. And so this is when I partnered with the university, and they helped me gather the data. And they track these students. I now have one, since that study is over with, the information was so valuable to some of my other partners that they said, hey, we'll carry that on. And so every time a pregnant or parenting student at the beginning of the school year or any time during the school year registers with me, lets me have their information so I keep track of how many I actually have here and how they're doing in school. We meet once a month. The kids get a gift card. We have all kinds of support resources that come in for them. They're signed up for after-school parenting programs. And so they see a value, and we see a definitive value in the data that I have, the real, actual, warm body data for the school. I have used this data to secure a lot of grants and resources for my school. And it's not that hard. It's an Excel file. When a student comes in, I take a moment, they fill out the paper, the data is keyed in, and it's kept. When I need to see those students, I simply send a list down to the office once a month. They tell me who's still in school. I have them send them up to me. We have a gathering. If they're not in school, they'll fill in the small other fields you can't really see. It tells me what school they transferred to, if they dropped out, if they're out having a child, or what they know. Again, this goes back to treating my attendance people really well, and they help me collect the data that I need for these resources, for the grants. Now, once we've got this data all collected, we've put together our data, we know about our program strengths, we've documented with pictures what we do, we've been out there in the public, we've got statistics, we've been online to read, and now we've got to find grants. And you know, a lot of them say Google search, there's not much out there, but you know, I've used Google search back in the day when I needed something, and that's where I first started. There are lots of good information, and yes, in the beginning, I filled out a lot of grants that I did not get. However, I started figuring out why I wasn't getting them, and I've kind of refined that. But a lot of new agencies have popped up with grants that if I didn't do a Google search every so often, I wouldn't know were available. Absolutely wouldn't know. I've also done local agency search. There are agencies that need our help and support, that there are agencies that their actual what they have to do is keep track of these teams or worry about the health of these teams. And so I partner with them and say, hey, there's a reason why we can't help each other. I have community partners that come into the school and mentor my students. And with them, they bring partnerships, they bring funds, they bring money. I'm going to show you part of what they do along with that. Next couple of slides. I also have a lot of community foundations that are here to simply funnel. A lot of places don't want to worry about finding donors. And so I have a lot of community foundations that simply are there to manage grant monies, and I've connected with them. And the main thing for that is that follow-up and research. Federal technology grants. Federal law, when it comes out every year, the news talks about it. There are tons of federal technology grants that are out there. Now, they're a little more tricky to write about. You've got to be a little more specific in what you need and what you're going to do with the technology and how you're truly going to upgrade the experience the students have. But there's tons of federal technology grants out there. And then, of course, DonorsChoose.org. I've used this quite a bit, especially when I have those smaller needs that are right there. Donors Choose is simply a way a lot of people that want to give money can kind of funnel that money through. If you haven't been to DonorsChoose.org, I recommend that you sign online and put your stuff out there. It's kind of like, I call it the Craigslist of grants. There's absolutely tons of resources you wouldn't think about. And put things out there. I've learned to repurpose a lot of my money through a lot of these different types of foundation grants and DonorsChoose.org. Because if the money I have accessible is repurposed, then I can use what I have gained for other reasons. Here's some of the places that I've gotten money from in the last several years. I didn't realize that Cox Communications has a Connects Foundation here in town. But again, a lot of these grants that I'm showing you here are companies I've gotten from are a multi-school grant or the entire school. A lot of times, a lot of them don't want to do these small, tiny grants. They want to give $10, $20, $30, $40, $50,000. Well, to do that, it needs to be a lot broader base and a lot more of a collaborative type unit. And so like the Cox Connects Foundation, that's a $10,000 to $30,000 grant, but they want to see a school-wide impact from your funds. But can a school-wide impact from your funds still benefit you as a teacher? Absolutely. Not to mention when you partner, collaborate with other teachers, it's one of those things that really broadens it. The only one I haven't really received on here is the Toyota grant. Applied for it a couple times. It's more of a scientific grant, and I thought since we had family consumer sciences, I might work my way into it, but I have yet to have that happen. AdoptAClassroom.org is a kind of a new thing to me. But it helps with a lot of the smaller resources that are needed. And of course the Masonic Foundation and local Masonic lodges have done a lot for contribution. A lot of you know about Walmart and their matching grants. Of course, OG&E has Job Shadow. Target's one of my big sponsors for a couple of large events that we do. But these have all been places that I have secured grants the last several years, or people that have helped out. This is probably the biggest piece of the puzzle that I have are the groups that are here on a daily basis to help out with this. Then we'll talk about my community partners. You know, we all talk about grants being these giant-sized things that we buy, but when I take a look at the resources that come into my classroom on a daily basis, it's money I don't have to really spend. Then I call these my mentor with benefits. They're here in my classroom. What they do is actually give of their time, but they also give of their resources that they need. You start thinking about things. We're getting ready to have a Christmas party here. We sponsored the elementary school down the street, which is, believe it or not, 98% free and reduced lunch. This will be the 32nd year this school has done this project. And the kids want some resources. They wanted a book for every kid at the school. They wanted gift bags for them. They wanted some items for them. So I talked to some of my mentors that came in. They saw us planning and talking about it. Next thing you know, I have boxes of books up here today. Was it money the kids didn't have to outlay? Yes. Did it free up some funds that I had set aside for FCCLA that we can use for something else? Yes. Again, I call these mentors with benefits. Had a big dinner being planned for my students, one of those award banquets. When my mentors found out about it, she said, we've got funds for that type of thing. Let us pay the catering bill. There was $1,000 I could put back in my activity fund. A lot of times it's just letting them know and inviting them into your classroom. A lot of times they'll adopt a need. Several years back, some of my babies that I had were destroyed in storage. And I all of a sudden was at a crisis mode for babies, no real funds set aside, need them kind of quickly. And I put the word out to my mentors, and they all adopted that need. I had several companies that sent me money to buy a baby. We had a big baby shower kind of thing, and thanked them and recognized them, and they adopted that need. Was it an official grant? Not necessarily. Did it develop from a relationship that they knew about, that I had already put together? Yes. So keep in mind, it's not always about those huge grants, but a lot of times those grants can lead to them. It was one of those mentors with that adoption program that turned me on to the Cox Communication grant several years back. That made me aware of that. Hey, have you tried this? And in one of my Google searches, I hadn't caught up with it. And so it's those relationships that can also help. The quid pro quo thing works. I get all kinds of funds delivered to the school. I get all kinds of items delivered. But they may need me to come speak at one of their board meetings, or when I come to their foundation and talk about what goes on here, or how they utilize funds. And so they need a report. Instead of writing it for them or having them do it, I go do it for them. That's what I call that quid pro quo thing. Not to mention, I get out there in the public, and there are others that will see what we do, because you never know when you talk in a gathering who you're going to touch or who's going to realize what it is that you have going on. So I call that the quid pro quo. And again, I'll get calls that will say, hey, did you realize we were doing this? Did you realize that a couple of the banks are doing some grants for literacy? Just started because of all the literacy education that's come up everywhere. Was I aware of them? No. They called to make sure I was aware of them. They can also take care of an expense that you have, so that funds you have can be used in other ways. I had a local group call me, one of the Masonic foundations, and they said, hey, is there anything we can do for you that you need to have taken care of? And things had run thin on groceries that year. Absolutely. Funding just was not there, not available. And next thing you know, here comes $1,000 for groceries. And so a lot of times I would call those grants, but I really kind of call those my community partners. But again, that's all money that comes into your program that makes the money you may have from other resources, kind of like your incentive funds and things like this that can be repurposed and you have someone else take care of your basic expenses. And then, of course, there's private foundations. This is one of the newest things that I've come across with private foundations. And I really stumbled on this through activities here at school. The school I'm at was built in 1928, so we've had a lot of things that needed to be refurbished, redone, fixed up. And it's been kind of one of those 10-year missions of finding out who cares about that and how do you find money for that. And next thing you know, I've stumbled onto foundations that's kind of their thing. And that foundation begat this foundation. The only thing different about private foundations are that they will have a lot different type of paperwork. It's not an RFP that has all these parameters and guidelines. They just want to know about you and what you do and what needs you may have. They're going to be the more personal foundations, the ones that want to come see your program. They want to come see what you do. They want to witness where their money's going to go and what it's going to be. And so this is one of those things about, especially, well, this time of year I've got several calls already. Several foundations or organizations, fraternal social organizations, can we adopt you for our Christmas project? What is it you need, or what do your students need? You know, it's amazing how money can be repurposed and sent for that. And I've even told them things like, I need baby gear, I need sewing supplies, I needed mannequins one year. I needed some mannequins for the kids to work on for a project. Did I have to go secure a grant to buy those mannequins for $100 a piece? No, they just started appearing in my classroom. But again, I call those private foundations. You'll find these things through those social organizations like Junior Achievement, the Masonic Foundation. A lot of the Greek social organizations, they will do a lot of this kind of donating. University alumni associations, I've received funding from them, and a lot of them will have what they call social funds. And I'll write for $1,000 for this, $1,000 for that, those types of organizations. But that's kind of a new thing for me. I'm really kind of developing those private foundations and discovering that avenue. But again, look around where you are. You may have universities or alumni or social organizations or fraternal organizations. Rotary Club is a big partner in some of the things that we do here, as well as the Lions Club. So don't ignore those private foundations. They have a lot to offer. It's not necessarily a grant online for you to go through. And keep in mind, they may ask for a lot different things than you're used to giving when it comes to grants and foundations. And I found that in doing this type of work, this is where that private documentation or those statistics, those real pictures and documentation have really helped out a lot. And when the money arrives, be ready to spend the funds. A lot of times, I've had foundations call and say, you know, we funded your friend for this at so-and-so school, but they have yet to spend the check or do whatever. It amazes me. I make sure that I have received quotes of things I might want just in case I might get a grant. Most companies don't mind. And I got caught on this too. Make sure your district does not have a restriction on the purchase that will not allow the use of the funds from a granting source. I got caught on that. I wanted one of those giant size 48-inch photograph printers. I saw it at ACTE several years back. They were printing up huge posters and pictures and documentation, and I wanted one of those for my school and my program. And I came back. I had a technology grant going real soon. I came back and changed my whole grant to write for an entrepreneurial project and a school student engagement project to buy one of those giant-sized printers. I was awarded the grant. The money arrived. My district has a moratorium on buying inkjet printers. This printer is inkjet. And so even though the money was awarded to me, the funds came to the school because it came from a foundation, which will happen a lot. The money was put in the account. The district would not allow the purchase because they do not allow the purchase of inkjet printers. That took me about 3 or 4 months of kind of climbing up that ladder and going through the approval process to make them understand I'm not buying an inkjet printer from Staples or Walmart. I was buying a large, singular purpose that you couldn't buy anywhere else type of equipment. And so just make sure, but I called the company to let them know that I was having trouble spending the funds and the reason why. But just make sure when you purchase something, or when you have these wants and wishes and huge dreams, which I hope all of you all do, that your district does not have restrictions on the purchase and will not allow the use of the funds. I've had it happen before. It can be a sticky wicket if you're not careful. And then have your quotes ready. I came back from ACTE in Atlanta just this past weekend. There were several companies that have equipment that I plan on attempting to purchase, and so I have contacted them already to get me a quote. Most quotes will give you a time limit of 60 to 90 days. A lot of times if you have something in the process or they know that it's for a potential grant, they really don't mind doing this, and they'll send you an official quote so you can have it for the grant. A lot of times they'll extend the process. I've only had one time in 10 years where the cost increased, and more than once it even worked out where there was some kind of a sale or promotional thing done, because a lot of times grants are awarded, you write for them in what I call the grant season, which is September to November. People kind of stew and think about them and start awarding the money usually in a January type time limit, and then you've got to get things spent and documented. And so a lot of times companies will have sales in the springtime, the April to May type time. So that's just kind of the standard thing. Now let me mention while I'm talking about that, you've got to be careful. A lot of grants will have that weird time limit on them. Some will give you 2 weeks. Some may give you 60, 90 days. And don't assume because you have 90 days you can work on it tomorrow. Those are the kinds you've got to kind of get after, because a lot of times they will get thousands of grant requests in. And I promise you, they're reading the first few till they find ones they really want, and they chunk the rest of them away. And so make sure that your stuff gets in there early and on time. And then documentation. I just got this grant for my babies. When my babies came in, I took a cute little picture, and the kids cropped this and had a heart around it. We did thank you cards, and we sent thank you cards so they know that we got our babies and how cute are they. When my students were passing out books at the Capitol, I sent a picture like this. The students all wrote on the picture, thanking them for the experience and what we did, and sent it off to them. Of course, my work with the Thunder goes without saying, but we stopped with all of our shirts on, took a picture, and it went in a thank you card. It's not hard to get programs that allow you to print your own thank you cards. I print my own and send them off. And I know everyone says, well, thank you cards are a thing of the past. They are not. Everyone needs to be thanked often, and thanked for real. And it's one thing that I make sure that my students do. And you know, a picture's worth 1,000 words. I can't say that enough. And with digital media like it was, I look at 10 years ago when I was taking tons and tons of pictures. I have stacks and stacks of prints. But I was always ready should it be needed. Digital's made it so much easier today. So document. Take those pictures. You may never need them, but then again, if you do, it's real hard to go back and recreate. And then publicity. I have discovered this. A lot of the companies, especially the companies like Walmart, Target, those types of companies that are in retail that will have their foundation part, a lot of their grants and grant renewals are based on the recognition that you get. They want to have that branding out there. They want that, they need that, but they won't specifically say it. It won't say, here's your award, congratulations, make sure everybody knows that, that we gave it to you. But it's one of those kind of unwritten rules. And so I always make sure that I call the newspaper, let them know. If I can, I brand my event or equipment with, you know, this was graciously donated or grant awarded by. A lot of times on the premiere of using the equipment or something, I will invite a representative to come by, let them see what we do. If nothing else, of course, you know, I'm the queen of pictures. We'll take pictures and send them. And of course, I always write letters, and I always have a card for my students to sign all over. Again, if you want to get something done, you put the student's face in front of these people, and absolutely that's where it's at. They want to know that the kids are actually getting the funds and using what they have. Statistics and data. There are some grants that require continuing service, I will call it. I've got some grants that I would call renewal grants. They want to know that what they're giving you money for is working as necessary. And so make sure that if it's a grant for a piece of equipment, suppose you're going to write one for Real Care Babies through some agency, then I would make sure that they know that you keep track of how many students use them. I keep on a spreadsheet what kind of grades the students got in using them. My students write reflections when they do the total parenting experience. They write reflections about using the empathy belly. They write reflections about using the babies. They write reflections about all of it. I keep those in a notebook. Talking the number of students that use the equipment or the experience. And a lot of times with those personal grants or foundation grants, like I said, the foundation I received for the FCCLA uniforms, that was just last spring. That came from a person through the foundation that has a real love of FCCLA, which used to be FHA years ago. So I made sure that that personal touch kicked in this year when we wore them, and I sent her personally through the foundation back a thank you card. And so keep that statistics and data. Some places absolutely must have it, but always document the number of students that you have that use these things. Are there any questions or clarification? I've talked now for almost 50 minutes. Is there any clarification or questions that can be answered by anyone? This is your opportunity to let me know if I need to clarify anything.
Okay, we do have a couple of questions. I'm just going to read them, and if you have any more, if anybody has any other questions, feel free to type them in the next few minutes, and we'll try to get to them before our time is up. The first one says, do you find most grant applications must be submitted online or in hard copy? And if they are online, do they make attaching the photos or documentation fairly easy in your opinion, or is that kind of difficult?
Oh, great question. Let me tell you what, my most frustrating thing are online grants, and I'll tell you why. How many times have you had a moment to sit down and type it all in and get it all ready to go, and then you think, wow, I should have added this later? Not to mention they're also very restrictive on verbiage. That one I showed you a snapshot of previously. I'm going to go back here for just a moment. This one. This was an online. You can see how it's all stuck in here. And so I had 200 words, I believe. And so you have to be able to write things very clear and concise. And I had to key in my data for that one, what I was going to use and how I was going to use it. You see this down here. And so online grants, I find the smaller ones are online grants, a lot of small ones. Most of my large grants, like by that I mean the $10, $20, $30, $50,000 grants, those are all going to be a hard copy that's got to be submitted in a packet to a place. A lot of my smaller ones are going to be online things to fill in, and the only hard part there is having what you need. Now I have found a lot of them will let you cut and paste. And so I will go online and look at the online grant, take a screenshot of it, print it out, do all my typing somewhere else, and go back and copy and paste and get it ready to go. That gives you a real chance to edit and make sure that you've said everything you need to say. It's kind of like in this beginning one up here that I talked about. Oh, sorry, wrong one. I covered career clusters, I covered certification, I covered my advisory committee, and this was all, if you break that down, it's maybe 100 and some odd words.
Okay, kind of a follow-up question. Yes, kind of a follow-up question to that. Do online applications allow you to save and come back to it most of the time or not?
It depends. It depends. Some companies do, some companies don't. It's kind of like any type of software. I found the larger the company, the better the software is. It will allow you to save and then submit when you're ready. A lot of the smaller companies, they don't have that very expansive software, and it will not. It's like it's one and done. Okay? But a lot of them will let you save and submit. But once you click that submit button, there's no taking it back. When it comes to, I forgot to answer a question earlier about adding pictures. A lot of the companies, when you want to add attachments, that'll be a separate window where you'll put all your supporting documentation into that window, and that window will go the same time everything is submitted. And I'm sure that's just for their own security in uploading things to their systems. But yes, I've not really had a problem in the larger grants adding documentation. In a lot of the smaller grants, smaller companies, it's a little more elemental. Did I answer her question?
Yes, I think that sounded good, yeah. Let's see, the next one we have is, who do you talk to in the school district to ensure that you'll be clear to spend any funds that you're awarded? Who would you ask?
Okay, that's a really good question. The only reason I started on this process, we get a lot of title funds, and in seeing what the district takes for getting a purchase order and getting a process, after my little faux pas with the printer, I now ask. I ask if I'm going to buy technology. I email the director of IT, and on any school website, they're going to see who the director is. And simply tell them, a lot of times if they're informed, they will even help you out with this kind of stuff, kind of like make sure you get this and this and this. And so I go to a director. A district as large as ours has a purchasing department. They have guidelines. Simply got a copy of the guidelines. Smaller districts, that may be a more personal one-on-one kind of thing. You simply go down and ask them. But I have learned the hard way. Companies want money spent, and if you ever want to get money again from a company, you need to make sure you spend the money. And so I would simply ask the director of that area. But every large district for sure has a purchasing guideline. I just wasn't aware of the real problem with it. Good question.
Okay. Here's a question about collecting data. Do you have to offer compensation to the universities or community colleges to get them to help you collect and process data?
Oh, no. You forget I'm doing them a favor. I'm serious about that. A lot of times, I discovered this. I've got a couple of master's degrees, and I discovered in doing my thesis and projects that I needed places to work. It started me thinking, wow, if I need a place to work, I bet someone else does too. And so a lot of times when they have those meet and greets where you go talk to people, or they have those community meetings, or they're having an open house, I make sure I go to the university, I pass out my card, and I remind them that I'm available should they need somewhere to assign someone. I've had a lot of student helpers in gathering data. I also discovered that they needed research projects. A lot of them need projects to work on, and the school I'm at really lends itself to that. And so I have yet to compensate. In fact, like I said, I'm really kind of doing them a favor. They've got a place to get their data and their statistics for their reports and what they're doing. But again, I'm dealing with graduate students for the most part on those type of projects. But you know, any help with getting data is help. I know how teaching is, and I'll take any help I can get.
Okay. Next question. If your school happens to have a grant writer and you would like a grant, you want to apply for a grant, do you give them the information and let them do it, or take it on yourself only?
I wouldn't know. We don't have a grant writer at our school. Our district doesn't really even have a grant writer per se. They'd like me to do that, but they don't offer enough compensation for me to sit and do this all the time without me reaping the benefits. You could always ask. Professional grant writers really have a lot of the ins and outs. And again, don't let grants be scary. Take it on. It's kind of like I tell the kids about scholarship applications. I have students that won't fill it out. I keep telling them, where else do you earn $500 an hour by sitting down and filling out an application? The same for teachers when it comes to grants. And I promise you, the more you write, the more you'll get better at what needs to be in there and how to actually get some more of these grants. I would ask them if they will do a private grant for you, then I would let them. I find very few, most of them are into district type grants.
Okay. Do organizations who offer grants give you feedback after they make a decision? For example, if you didn't get the grant, do they tell you why, or do you not find that's the case usually?
I usually ask. A lot of times they will. Sometimes they don't. But that's just the nature of the beast. Not all of them want to tell you why not. I don't think a company that you and I both know, tens of thousands applied for a grant, and they went through the first section to find people good and tossed out the rest of them, is going to call and say, hey, you didn't make the cut because you didn't give in early enough. They're not really going to tell you that. But a lot of them will give you feedback if they have reviewed it, but I always ask. I would say probably, I'd say 1 out of 3 will tell me. But anymore, I really kind of get what I apply for anymore. In the beginning, I know part of it was simply the things I talked about early on, and seriously, this slide right here is probably one of the most important. I did not identify the outcome I wanted. I did not identify the outcome I wanted. I can't stress that enough. You have to have a reasonable, attainable, identifiable, doable outcome. And very rarely do things get turned down.
Okay. I think you may have partially answered this one, but I'm going to just ask it one more time. Is there a certain time of year or a cycle that you find a lot more funding opportunities than during other times of the year?
A lot of them go for the school year kind of thing, and you'll see them come out in that August, September, October, November kind of thing. But there are some that go on the corporate cycle, not on educational cycles are June 30th to July 1st. Most corporates still do a fiscal year, which is the calendar year. Okay, some companies have their own fiscal year based on the industry they're in, which is shoot, I had one that was February to March kind of thing, and so I haven't really found. I wish I could say you can do this all summer while you're on your break, and be ready when the school year starts. I haven't found it to be that way. Most of the grants I turn in are in the fall, or else early in the school year. By that I mean the January, February type mark. I have very few that ever come due in the summertime. Hardly any.
Okay, and one more kind of a wrap-up question. It sounds like you do a lot of networking. Can you mention again some of the community organizations or groups that you go speak to, attend their meetings, just to make some connections in the community?
Absolutely, and she's absolutely right. I'm a network kind of girl. I learned early on that old saying of you can't do it by yourself. My grandma always said, many hands, less work. And my first year teaching, when the school year wrapped up, and I was like, oh my God, it's over, and I realized I hadn't accomplished what I wanted to do, I needed help in doing it. So I'm huge on networks. But I have found you've got to find the people that care about what your students' issues are and where you're at. I have tons of community partners. In fact, in my building today, I had a group that came. Now, the requirement for the grant for us to get an in-building, we're getting a full-service health clinic installed in our building starting in January. It's been a 10-year process for me. But to do that from the private family fund that I met at a cocktail party that I found through one of the other foundations I went to through a service organization, we've got to teach the STD contraception type program. They teach them to all of our classes in our freshman academy. They're going to fund the deal. And I met them through a cocktail party. When they have family forums, or you'll see them online where they'll talk about they're having a community meeting, I go to those community meetings. I don't have to go to as many as I used to because people know who I am these days. But anytime they had a civic meeting, I was there. I have been a member of Chamber of Commerce. And you're going like, why would you go to Chamber of Commerce if you're a school teacher? Those people are the ones that are going to help me with what I need done. And I found that, believe it or not, my students can give them a lot of services as well. And so start looking for those places to go meet people that aren't in education. Education in and of itself does not have the kind of funds that you're wanting to garner from people. So you've got to step outside of education into that corporate world. And once I made that connection and stepped out there, 10 times easier to make those connections.
Okay, all great information. It looks like that is all of the questions that were submitted, and it turns out we are right up against our hour time limit. So, really, it went really quick. So we want to thank DJ for all of the information and for her time today, and thank everybody for attending. Like I said, we did record the presentation, so we'll be emailing a link to you for a file on our website that you can take a look at that. And DJ, I would maybe like to include your slideshow on there as well, maybe. So if we could get that from you, we'll get that on the website as well.
Okay.
And that'll come in an email to all the attendees, and you can use it to show others if you need to, and go from there. So thanks to everybody for attending, and we hope you have a great rest of the day.